again and was just like, I know incest. Big seller. No, I'm usually pretty careful with planning. There are a lot of people who can sit down and just write and see where the story takes them, but I'm not one of those people. You know, I need to have an outline and I need to know where I'm going, or I tend to feel kind of, you know, panicky, like the story may run off in any direction. And with the incest, that was planned, it was one of the first things about the book. I was like, this is going to be a book about two people who fall in love and then find out that their brother is her. And this was because I watched a documentary while I was in England, 2003, for New Year's. I had flown over there because my friend was having a New Year's Eve party, and I had not brought any money because I didn't have any, so I had neglected to think about ways to feed myself or where to stay. So I was living in his coal scuttle, and there was a television there, and there was a documentary on about, I don't know why there was a TV in the coal scuttle, but well, it's a long story. But there was a documentary on about two people who were both adopted, met and fell in love, got married, decided to have kids. They went for genetic testing because, you know, they didn't know, being adopted, they had no medical histories, and they wanted to know if they had any diseases that they might pass on to their children. And they came back, and the doctor was like, well, there's the good news, you don't have any diseases that you might pass on to your children, and there's the bad news, your brother and sister. Not so much for them, but it was really interesting. And I was like, wow, you know, like there's a lot of stories about forbidden love, and you know, but this is really forbidden. Stakes are really high. This is the kind of thing that when you're, you know, it really attracts you when you want to tell a story with a lot of potential. So yeah, that really was one of the first things that I was like, I want to tell a story about tattoos and incest. All the way in the back. All the way back. This one? Sure.
Hi. As a writer, do you find that some of your vision has been sort of left out of the finished product as you go about the publishing and editing process?
You mean like if some of the text left on the cutting room floor?
Like plot points or certain things that you wanted to put in, they just didn't make it, or you had to cut out just because of language issues?
Yeah, I mean, things do get cut, but more often than they get cut. I mean, it's interesting because people are often like, well, you should put up deleted scenes, and sometimes I do. There are deleted scenes from the books that are on my website that you can go and read. But, so, what happens much more often than actually just cutting out a whole scene is just rewriting it. So, it's not so much, it's less like a film in which you actually hack out bits, but you basically go in and you rewrite that scene so it becomes something completely different. More than just, you know, cutting out pieces. You make Anya one up and down with a few of the cuts. It's trying to work for me.
I just noticed there was a lot of manga and anime references, and like with Max reading Angel Sanctuary, I thought it was hilarious. But do you have any favorite manga or anime?
I do. It's been a while since I've been reading it, but when I was writing City of Bones, I was living with an illustrator who was a huge manga and anime fan, and he eventually sort of like beat me into liking it. I didn't think I would. So what I remember of really liking was Trigun, Fruits Basket, Vampire Bleach, Gravitation, Full Metal Alchemist. Full Metal Alchemist. And Neon Genesis Evangelion. So yeah, I do. I've been reading some manga that's set in the Victorian era, just as well as writing Clockwork Princess. So Emma and Godchild are both actually good. I think Godchild is the same, Carrie being the same person who did Angel Sanctuary, which is also good. All right, this side of the room. Over here. Whoever said that. difficult. I worked on, I was a journalist for years. I wanted to write fiction, but, being a fiction writer, it's a very difficult thing to get your work published and then to make money off it. So, I would say there are probably people who had an easier time than me, and probably people who had a harder time. I worked as a writer for tabloid magazines when I lived in New York, and we would sit around all day, really bored, because nothing came in the way of news until late at night. So everybody else would, shop online, and I would write City of Bones. And so finally, I sold it, but I kept working right up until I think City of Glass was published, when I finally was like, okay, I quit my writing full time. The actual process of getting published, getting an agent, and getting a publisher to take the book, and then having it put out, probably about 2 years. And that's pretty short time. Okay, you waving your arm down there. Yes.
I need something.
So there's a lot of mythical references and angel lore. What inspired you to incorporate that into your books?
I've just always been really fascinated by mythological stuff, things about mythology, about angels. The Bible is literature. I was raised as a pretty much atheistic Jewish person, and people are often writing in their letters. People are often like, well, you must be Catholic, or really into saints and angels, and I'm like, well, not really. I just find this stuff really, fascinating and beautiful, and I find the Bible to be a beautiful, piece of literature. I'm fascinated by the story of the Fall, by Paradise Lost, by Dante's Inferno, and I had read a lot of urban fantasy that dealt with folklore, fairies, and sort of, stories that ordinary people tell. Mythology is stories about gods and angels and demons and whatnot. So I thought, why not do urban fantasy instead of folklore? Musicology. Bring in the gods and the angels and the demons into our ordinary lives and see how it goes. Sweet and the pig. I know you're about the pig. Okay, so I'm going with that. Are you going to be writing any other series after this? Are you going to be writing any other series after this? Ooh, yes, I'm super booked up. Okay, so after, well, I'm finishing the Infernal Devices, so Clockwork Princess comes out next year. And then the last book of Mortal Instruments, Sea of Heaven and Fire, and then I'm starting a new series called The Dark Artifices, which takes place 5 years after the events of Mortal Instruments and deals with the shadow hunters of the Los Angeles Institute. Some of them you met if you have read City of Lost Souls. And then I'm also co-writing a 5-book fantasy series called Magisterium with Holly Black. It's awesome. So I've got a lot of books coming up. And basically all my Shadowhunter books are going to publish in the first half of every year, and then the Magisterium books are going to publish in the second half.
This is more of an Infernal Devices question, but how did you come up with the idea about will-hating ducks?
Okay. How did I come up with the idea of will-hating ducks? It came from a true experience. I was with my friend Sarah Reese Brennan, who is also a young adult fantasy writer. It's a fine series called The Demon's Lexicon. And I was actually researching for Clockwork Angels, so we were in London, we were in Hyde Park, and we were walking around, and we had gone to Harrods earlier that day and picked up food. We'd gotten, duck pies. So we're eating our duck pies, walking along, and there's a bunch of ducks kind of following us in the river. I was like, I think they just want some food, so I started throwing them. And Sarah, who is crazy most of the time anyway, started screaming, you can't feed them that. That'll make them cannibals. They're eating ducks. They're duck cannibals. And I was like, they seem to like it. So, so I'm feeding the ducks poultry pie, and they're all converging to eat it. I took her pie away and fed them her pie. And then we didn't have any pie left, so the ducks looked at each other, they looked at us, and then they chased us. And we ran away. And I said to Sarah, never trust a duck. And so I wrote that into The Clockwork Angel as a story that Will and Jem told about each other in Hyde Park, messing around. I wanted to illustrate, well, I mean, really it was there just to be illustrated with the fact that they had a casual, this great casual friendship that they had time together, working up to the park or whatever. And funnily enough, Sarah had actually written a scene referencing the same experience into her book, so I often get bewildered letters from people who are like, there's cannibal ducks in this other yeah.
That's awesome.
You don't want to know about it. So, yeah.
That is so hysterical.
Yes, point to your friend. Me? Not me.
Okay, this is an improvised question. If you were in Tessa's shoes, would you choose Will or Jem?